Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for your word and for your Son, Lord. I pray that as we look at your word, that we may be with our minds and our thoughts. Help us to see you and your light and your glory, Lord. Be with our minds and help us to learn more of you so that self may die, Lord. In Jesus Christ's holy name we do pray. Amen.
I'm sure I won't be back here Sunday morning. First off, let me deal with this. This paper that we handed out last night, but we put on the web, this is as much for the people on the web as it is the people in this room. As I understand it, I don't know this for certain, but as I understand it, this study here was compiled very quickly. Okay, I have a hunch it was handed off to Brother Tabot and that he put it in this format. Maybe not, I don't know who did it exactly, but I got this through Brother Tabot. And I found right off a typo, and then I told myself, well, I'm not going to hand this out until I clean up the typo. And then when I brought it into class the other day, I forgot about even the reason why I wanted to reformat it first, and it's this. So everyone pay attention, because this will trip you up if you really start looking at this seriously. This is dealing with the Battle of Raphia and the Battle of Panium, among other things. But everywhere Panium is referenced in this paper, and there's probably about 10 times, it's supposed to be Raphia, and everywhere Raphia is mentioned, it's supposed to be Panium. They are reversed consistently all the way through. So as you go through and you're reading it, cross it out and put the other one in, or once you start becoming familiar with that Panium is this way mark and Raphia is this way mark, and you're studying with this, I just think it's going to be a headache, particularly for those of you that are watching on the web and are downloading this. Make sure you listen to this disclaimer right now, or you're going to be struggling, all right? I'm assuming I can take this off. Anyone? I seen one head nod, that's enough to go. I had a couple external inputs yesterday about something, having question marks about a concept, and I'm not necessarily the one that should be laying this out, because other people have been dealing with this for a while, but I was getting questions about this, so I want to real quickly just put a concept as I'm seeing it in place, and then leave it behind and go back to this where we were yesterday. And I don't think I'll be here Sunday morning, back from Alabama. So some time ago, a couple trimesters ago, we reached the point where the temple was being opened, and we were seeing that the 7-branch candlestick was also marking all the waymarks along the way, and even the knobs that are on the candlestick are even referencing the 3 steps in each of those histories. So at that point, we had the candlestick, I think at the midnight cry, back where we quit. But now we're considering, is the candlestick supposed to be at the midnight cry or in the middle of the history of midnight to the midnight cry? So Sister Tamina has, on the other side of this board, she has a nice breakdown of this candlestick, and she's going to share that Sunday morning. And then when she gets done with that, if it's an open discussion that takes you all the way through the class, fine. But if not, if there's time left, I'm hoping that what I handed out 2 days ago on the 6 Syrian wars with the challenge, let's see what all of us as corporately can dig out, that maybe you could work on that until I got back Sunday morning. Okay, but this is what I wanted to put in place. And I haven't thought this through. I hope I don't kick it around too much, but we identified when we were at the point in time when we were grappling with Abigail and David, that in that story, where David starts in the story of Abigail and David, he's in the wilderness of Paran. And the history before that, when Saul's chasing him, trying to kill him, he's in the wilderness of En-Gedi. Okay, so I'm just dealing with wildernesses here. So we understood this to be 9/11 to the midnight cry, and this 1989 to 9/11. So all I'm doing is putting some wildernesses up there. Another wilderness, or a way we can see a wilderness, is at 9/11, and you can do this more than one way with fractals. If this is the week that Christ is confirming the covenant with many, then if you take it to the Sunday law, which you can do, because there's a close of probation there, you can mark this AD 34 and this 27, or you can do the same, you can have the same starting point with 9/11 at a larger fractal. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm going totally off the top of my head right now. And you can take this to the close of probation. But if you're using this as the week that Christ confirmed the covenant with many, that this is, both of these are typified by 27, and both of these are typified by 34. You got many ways to illustrate wilderness, is what I'm saying, in the periods that make up the prophetic structure that we're dealing with, okay? But you can show, all you have to do is show 2 or 3 wildernesses to establish something about wildernesses, right? Okay, so in this one, you know that if you're going 27 AD to 34 AD, like I'm saying both of these are, that in the middle you're going to have the cross, and the cross is going to break this down into 2 1260s. Because he's going to confirm the covenant with many for 3.5 years, and then through the disciples for 3.5 years. So in this, and this is, I hope you're following me, you can mark the close of probation at the Sunday law as the stoning of Stephen at one level, 34 AD, or you can take it out to where Michael actually stands up at the close of probation, which is even a better illustration of the stoning of Stephen, but both of them are valid using fractals. Anyone have a problem with that? Everyone understand it? Say amen. Okay, so what I'm saying is, now we have up here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wildernesses. And there's a whole bunch of wildernesses. And what I want to argue is that in these wildernesses, you always see, this is a wilderness time period here. You're always going to find a discernible waymark in the middle of them. It doesn't have to be in the middle, I'm not saying in the middle, but there's going to be a waymark in between. Okay, for instance, if 1989 to 1798, or no, that's going the wrong way. I'll just use the simple one here. 1996, there's a waymark in between it. Here, there's a waymark in between it. So all you need is 2 or 3 illustrations that in these wildernesses, there is what would this one be? This here, to the Sunday law, would be the midnight cry, right? If you're going all the way to the close of probation, what would this be? Sunday law, okay? So, is there a waymark in the middle of this wilderness? Okay, it's that one. Okay. Upon 2 or 3 witnesses, so I moved from wildernesses. I've showed that you can show that every period that we deal with in our reform line is a wilderness. And then the second thing I'm saying is that every wilderness is going to have some kind of waymark between its beginning point and its ending point. Sometimes it has more than one, but it's going to have at least one based upon the testimony of 2 or 3. Okay, so we know when we have a period of time in our reform line, that period of time will have a discernible waymark in it. You follow my logic? Okay, so what I'm saying is, and here's the question I was being asked, if you put midnight here and the midnight cry here, what justification do you have? And the question was framed like this. I see it by more than one person. I see people putting the emphasis on this number 3, okay? And then they'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I see that it fits. This is the question. I see that there's a logic to it, that it fits. But I haven't yet heard any clear prophetic argument why it's valid to do that. And the reason I would like to hear a clear prophetic argument for it being valid to do that is I can take all the lines I'm seeing being placed in this history and I can place them in a broader application. Okay, so this is the question. I'm speaking as if they're asking me. And I agree with them. What we can plug in here, we can plug in a fractal level further out, and many of us learned the longer fractal first. So now when we're taking the longer fractal and saying, let's put it all in here, the question is, what is the justification for building such great weight upon this waymark? Okay, so my answer to them was, for me, the wildernesses. Okay, you can show that every period of time in our reform line, from one way or another, is a wilderness. There's other ways to do it. I'm just using the wilderness to make my point. So once you can isolate all the periods in our reform line and say, okay, they're wildernesses. Second step is you can show that there's always a discernible waymark within the wilderness period. So therefore, if this is a wilderness, there should be a discernible waymark, okay? And then where I go from there, I'm not claiming that this is something I've discovered, but this is my logic for it, is this. The simple one to see is the 10 plagues, okay? Because the 10th plague here, if we're not counting them 1 through 3, but 1 through 10, the 10th plague is Passover. That's right here, okay? But Passover is also the first place in the scriptures that we have the cry at midnight. Okay? So my argument here is that the secondary argument is that Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning. So if this is midnight, the cry at midnight, and this is midnight, then you have this history. The beginning of this history and the end of this history is the same history. It's a complete period, and it's justifiable to set it in here. And you know that these 10 plagues, the 10th concludes here, and therefore in the 10 plagues there is a very specific and discernible break in the plagues right here. Okay? So I'm saying that I can justify it for myself using those 3 steps. Take a wilderness, show that the periods of times in our reform lines are wildernesses, then identify that one of the characteristics of the wilderness is there's always going to be a discernible waymark within that period of time. And then when you plug it into midnight to the midnight cry, you have the beginning being midnight, it's the waymark of midnight, and the end being midnight. Therefore, you got justification for plugging the 10 plagues in here, because the 10th plague is midnight. It's the cry at midnight. So I just want to put that in the public record, because people are struggling with is there a prophetic justification, or is it just simply because the lines seem to fit? And I don't think it's simply because the lines seem to fit. I think it is a legitimate prophetic structure. Okay, switching gears. we'll return to that paper and try to get through it. But I want to do something if I can. With the 6 Syrian wars, I want to get them over the top because there is something, and I don't know that I have the paper on the 6 Syrian wars that I handed out, so I might do it off the top of my head, and you guys can correct me if I get off base. Maybe I have it right here. No, I don't. Okay. Thank you. I'd rather put it up here, but I don't have much room because I want to do something below. But I'm going to put it up there anyway. We've identified, if you've watched this, that the second Syrian war is here. Okay, and we're marking it there. We went through that logic. I won't take the time for it. We've identified that the third Syrian war is here, and that the fourth is here, and the fifth is here. But the first and the sixth is what we're trying to figure out, right? Or at least I'm hoping that we're trying to figure out. And okay, so we can come back to that later. Here, what I'm down here, this paper we're going to try to get through is saying that at midnight, where's midnight? This is midnight, that right here, this would be verse 23, the League of the Jews, right? Has anyone looked closely at that since we were here yesterday? The League, and that here, it's going to argue is the battle of Actium. And that this is the time, if you remember in verse 24, he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds even for a time, and that this takes you to Constantine dividing the kingdom by moving the capital to Constantinople. I'll just put 330 here. But the reason that I wanted to get that up here is this. In verse 23, when it's talking about the League of the Jews, and which took place in 161 through 158, okay? But we have these two battles that take place in 168, 7 years before 161. So by two battles, this is where Rome takes out Antiochus Epiphanes, draws the circle around him, and takes out Macedonia in the same year, 168. So time is no longer, but if this is the League of the Jews in history, this came 7 years after that battle of Macedon and Epiphanes, those two battles. So I'm arguing that somewhere, this waymark, or the waymark back here, we should see represented Rome conquering two entities at the same point, at the same waymark. Okay, Macedon and Antiochus. So I want to put that in place before we start. I think that's a valid consideration. Do you understand what I'm saying? Is that this double victory in 168 came 7 years before the League with the Jews. The paper we're reading is arguing that the League of the Jews is here at midnight. Therefore, whatever 168 is going to represent on this timeline, it should be, I would think it's got to be this, or perhaps this unresolved first Syrian war back here. So So I just want to point your thoughts in that direction. Okay, so, and then we can return to this paper. Any comments, questions? Yes?
When you write at the whiteboard, would you mind writing bigger so we can read back here? Just for
Okay.
reference. Thank you.
All right, sorry. Other questions or comments?
I just want to point out that in the 1843 chart, the number 8 distinctly points out to Babylon, to papacy.
The number what?
Number 8. You have 538, you have 158, you have 508, 538. Everything ends with an N, with an 8. And 158, you're putting at the League of the Jews, and switching it to 161, we still haven't been able to find the proof, but I would still go with the 150 over 161.
Now, if you didn't hear what Brother Teon said the other day, of course he wasn't being that specific. He was, but I looked that up. What the pioneers understood, the pioneers mark 158, but the pioneers were not threatened by 161 because they're saying that, and it's that history, taking 161 and 158, once you plug it into here with what we're seeing about here, it's worth retaining both those dates. And here's the reason for. The Jews, the Adventists, the Jews reach out to Rome for support. The Adventists reach out to the United States government for support. And we've already argued in this class that in that dynamics, when the Seventh-day Adventists come after the faithful, that there's a principle with which judgment you judge, it's going to be meted out to you again. So we've already argued that even though the Adventist church is going to lead out to persecute the faithful in this coming crisis, immediately thereafter, they're going to suffer the same judgment upon them. So the point is, when you take 161, that's where the Jews came into the league, but it says that he's going to work deceitfully. And the pioneers understood that this term deceitfully is that by 158, Rome is now using that treaty that they've made with the Jews against the Jews. It's beginning the process where it's going to take away all of its national autonomy and turn it into just a province that's being governed by Rome, and Rome selecting who the high priest is and who the governor is. So it's saying that 161 is where the Jews were stupid enough to come into relationship with Rome, but by 158, now Rome is using that treaty to turn it against them. So it's worth retaining both of those dates because it's showing that it was a bad idea for the Jews, and the evil results begin in 158. And that gives you justification for holding on to William Miller's 666, which is kind of cool. So where did we stopped on page 7, I believe. But now that we all have a paper, I don't have to do all the reading. So let's get back into it first from the Bible and then take it up. Let's go back to Daniel 11. Let's start in verse 20. Brother Graham, will you do verse 20 of Daniel 11?
Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle.
Who is this?
Augustus.
Augustus. So it's marking the end of Augustus. Brother Nathan, next verse.
And in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably, and obtain the kingdom by flattery.
And who is this? Trump, Tiberius. But the key word here for this paper is that how does he come in? Peaceably. Okay, so historically you wouldn't see a connection, because in verse 23 it's going to talk about the League of the Jews, and it's going to jump backwards in history almost 200 years. Okay, but we're not restricted by that history now, because it's all being applied figuratively. So when you get to verse 24, and it says, he shall enter peaceably, verse 22 has already defined that the he that comes in peaceably is Trump. Okay, so it's really key there to see that. All right, so verse 23, Sister Tanya.
And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people.
Okay, that's Rome, beginning as a little island of pirates raiding the Mediterranean Sea and growing real slow as a small people. But once the Jews enter into this league, 161, the process of Rome conquering the world goes through the roof, and that's how they do it. That's how they do it. It blows my mind how present truth this is. They did something that had never been done by the other conquerors. It was through treaties and alliances, and in the last 48 hours, you've seen Trump, this guy, put the executive order out that he's going to build the wall, and now the president of Mexico saying, we're not paying for it, and I might not be coming to your meeting, and I might just pull out a NAFTA all by myself. And the reality of it is he can do all that, but the United States has got Mexico over the barrel, right? Financially. And Trump seems to have that character that he'll take advantage of the fact that they have him over the barrel. I don't know what this president of Mexico can do, but my point is that's what Trump is doing. He's starting to put an organization in the world based upon these treaties that he's doing, just like Rome did. Okay. Verse 24. Did we read verse 24? No. Sister Kathy?
He shall enter peaceably even upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey, and spoil, and riches. Yea, and he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time.
Okay, so how do we understand that? Okay, he's going to go ahead.
When Rome conquered, they didn't conquer by war this time around, not like his fathers' fathers had done. Those before conquered by war, but they came in subtly, and it was by decrees and things of that nature.
Treaties, alliances, and sharing the wealth, and that's what Trump's promising. He hasn't. No one's been able to see him actually do that yet, but he's saying this will be good for Mexico. Just using Mexico as an example, we're going to make America great, but if Mexico wants to come along for the ride, then we'll make them wealthy too. And I think he means it, whether he can do it or not. But that's what was going on in that history with Rome. But what's it mean even for a time, my brother?
360.
Okay, and where does that?
From the Battle of Actium until when Constantine moved the seat in 330.
Okay, so what's for me, this paper is going to argue that this is the Battle of Actium. I know I wrote really small, but that when it comes to Greek words, Eum is some kind of grammatical thing that they'll attach to a Greek noun, but really it's just act. I think that's kind of significant, because right here is the first Sunday law, the first act in the drama, okay? But this is what this paper is going to set forth now as we proceed, is that, and there's a lot of strong logic in it for that. So we can go back to the paper now, where we let off, because I think that's where it was taking it up. On page, page 7. someone said something? No? I don't know if I'll try to incorporate their graphics here as they have it, but I may put it up there down the line. I just want to deal at this level right now. So I'll read these first two things underneath the graphics. Or Sister Carol, you can.
The United States mounts a revenge attack and defeats Russia. This is typified by the Battle of Raphael.
Now, what do you have to do?
Oh,
It's the Battle of Paneum.
Neum, which is marked after the midnight cry.
Right up here. Next sentence, or next phrase, Sister Carol. The verse.
Yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain.
Okay, so what this paper is saying is that when you get to verse 23 and 24, it's telling us how Rome's going to take control of the world through treaties, doing something that's never been done. Fathers never conquered this way. None of the previous kingdoms conquered this way. And then verse 24 says, and they're going to rule supremely for 360 years. And now these verses are going to repeat and enlarge upon that history. Okay, and that's the contention of this paper. And that's the way Uriah Smith approaches it too. So you want to read the type, Brother Rashad, and that's from Thoughts on Daniel and Revelation 276.
Type. The cause of Antony's overthrow was the desertion of his allies and friends, those that fed of the portion of his meat. First, Cleopatra, as already described, suddenly withdrew from the battle, taking 60 ships of the line with her. Secondly, the land army, disguised, with the infatuation of Antony, went over to Caesar, who received with them with open arms. Thirdly, when Antony arrived at Libya, he found that the forces which he had there left under Scarpus to guard the frontier had declared for Caesar. Fourthly, being followed by Caesar into Egypt, he was betrayed by Cleopatra, and his forces surrendered to Caesar. Hereupon, in rage and despair, he took his own life.
Antony completely defeated, and Egypt is taken by Octavius. His fall took place in 4 steps. The number 4 is a symbol of scattering and destruction. So, how to incorporate this graphic up here? How many of you have read this? Did you get it last night? How many have read through it? Raise your hands high. Okay, so not everyone. These graphics are worth looking at, worth considering. What they're saying here on the top of the page, in this first line, is that before Octavius and Antony are going to go to war, they're going to consolidate they're going to get their army together for the war. And this becomes part of the prophetic narrative in our history, because we know that between Raphia and Paneum, that the king of the north is rebuilding an army because he just got beat here. So this consolidation of forces that they're saying takes place prior to Actium down in here is consistent with what is taught about the king of the north rebuilding his army in this history. So you're having 2 witnesses within Daniel 11 that in this history there is a military buildup. And 9 out of 10 times, if not 10 out of 10 times, when a nation enters into a military buildup, it produces an economic boom. Okay, so it's developing the thought that the economy is going to go through the roof during the time period of Trump until you get to here when Islam's going to do a strike and turn everything upside down. But that's why they're putting this in place, that back here in the year 31, this in advance of Actium, there's a consolidation going on. And then there is something to be said, no doubt, about the, go ahead.
Just on that line, I remember reading a week ago or so that the U.S. has something like 126 ships at this point in time, and Trump was talking about bringing it up to 350 plus, in that ballpark.
And, okay, time. Yeah, and he brought in these business leaders 2 days ago, and then after the same day he brought in the union workers, which are supposed to be contrary, and asked the union workers, what would you want us to do? And one of the union workers told him, make the pipes for these oil lines that you're bringing in out of American steel. So he's pushing that. You can see he's going to push these buttons if the steel industry is actually thinking about starting over again in the United States. That's okay, so this is the time they're marking up here on this graph, but they're marking a consolidation. That's consolidation. This is the Battle of Actium. And Constantine here. So under here, what they have is at midnight, the USA is now consolidating to accomplish a counterattack at Raphia at the midnight cry. Pardon me, Panium. I'm reading up this paper. My paper, I have it reversed. Okay, Panium. The king of the south is totally defeated here, and that's worth taking note of. One of the mistake of the Time of the End magazine, if you want to call it a mistake, the thing that the Lord held his hand over, if you want to say it that way, is my thinking that when the Soviet Union was swept away and Gorbachev then took a post at the United Nations, a post that he still serves at, that was symbolizing that the dragon power of the King of the South had moved to the United Nations, and now the dragon power was at the United Nations. But now we see the dragon power of the King of the South is still in existence with Russia. But here, Russia is totally defeated in this passage. So they cease to be, they're no longer in existence. So now the dragon power, the power that moves through history. This is right where in Daniel 10, when Gabriel is going to go and struggle with the Medes and the Persia, and lo, when I'm gone forth, the prince of Grecia will come. Right here is where the United Nations is coming into history, and this is right where the King of the South surrenders itself as being the prophetic symbol of the dragon, and this is right where the United Nations is the end-time dragon power is put in place. So there's some really strong logic in all of this. And if you're not familiar what I meant about the dragon power moving through history, I'll throw it out one more time. The beast, the dragon, and the false prophet. The beast is always in Rome. The false prophet is always the United States. But the dragon moves through history. From heaven to Eden to Babel to Egypt.
Yeah, I have two questions. First of all, I was reading the history of Russia yesterday, trying to see how it was going for her after the Soviet Union fell, and I saw that Russia suffered a lot of this, and
A lot of what?
a lot of the fall of the Soviet Union. And I don't understand for the moment how can in what way did Russia was spared by the king of the north coming through the countries, but stopped at the Russian frontier.
In what way was it spared?
Yeah, I mean, how can we mark that the king of the north stopped at the Russian frontier? What happened with the other countries that didn't happen with Russia?
I think that we're basing it strictly on the words fortress in the beginning verses of Daniel 11. In the one battle, Ptolemy goes all the way into the king's castle in the north, takes the king captive and takes him home. It says he enters into his fortress. But in the history that's illustrating 1989, the verse says he comes up to his fortress. So it's primarily based upon that acknowledgement that in that history, he did not go ahead and take control of Egypt. He stopped at its borders. So yeah, I don't think that means if what we're saying is accurate. I think it is. It doesn't mean that Russia didn't suffer, because it did suffer. All those countries were taken away from it, and Reagan had been putting all kinds of economic restrictions on them. They were hurting for a long time, but they were still Russia. They were still Egypt. They were still the king of the south.
And I didn't find that communism was continued in Russia after Soviet Union fell. Maybe I didn't.
Yeah, someone raised that question too. Is it communistic anymore?
It's atheistic in a way. Just the last year when they placed in that law about not proselyting unless you have gone through the government and you've gotten a license that they approve of, is just showing that there's still an atheistic movement or belief in that country, proving as it is still the king of the south.
Yeah, but the fact is that even though they are atheistic, they do not fight against the religious liberty how it were when the Soviet Union was in place. There was a much more fight against the religious liberty than it is now, as I understand. Maybe I'm wrong.
It's gaining strength, is not necessarily right off the top.
And the thing that made sense for me is, and I got this put in my head years ago, is that book by that KGB guy, where he says the plan of the KGB was always to collapse the Soviet Union and get the West Guard down until they were unprepared and then strike. So I don't know that that you have to have a perfect communism to qualify as the king of the South. I get the point, but I think the logic we're applying is still sound anyway.
Okay, and the second question, how can we apply the time period from midnight cry to the Sunday law, when we know that when the United States shall pass the first Sunday law at midnight cry, their fall down will begin, when we know that this time is known as supreme rule. I don't know if
yeah, you're saying from the midnight cry to the Sunday law, the judgments of God are going to escalate in the United States, and it's going to create an environment of chaos, not of strength and power that Rome had during its 360 years from 31 BC to 330. That was when it was invincible. And that's just some way, some prophecy works that way. Okay, Elijah the first, they wanted to arrest and kill him, but they didn't. Elijah the second, John the Baptist, just the opposite. They wanted to arrest and kill him, and they did. So sometimes the type will be just the opposite of the antitype. It doesn't, the antitype does not necessarily have to retain every characteristic of the type. Many times it's a complete reversal. So what you're saying fits that scenario where Rome in the 360 years is ruling supremely. How can that typify the period of time when the United States is crashing and going down, just through prophetic application, that is acceptable to see it that way, if it's true. Any other thoughts on that? Why is everyone so silent this morning? Okay.
Well, I have a thought. Looking at France, the way France grew after they started with the revolution, they basically sent up the army to conquer other countries for them in order to grow in power within their own land. The same thing happened with Russia. The way Russia grew is basically by conquering land and conquering strength. The body of the USSR kept growing until it became one united. And when they took it down, what they focused on the body. They started with Poland, and that's how they disintegrated, but not necessarily destroying the head.
Yeah, I mean, there's other arguments that click it on for me. One, when you were talking, the first communist leader after the Bolshevik Revolution has the same name as this last Russian ruler, Vladimir, ruler of the world, ruler of the world. And isn't it strange that it's the same name pretty much as Donald? Okay, and here's the confrontation between these two powers overruling the world. So you got the first and the last of Russia. If it wasn't no longer the king of the South, then you shouldn't have the end guy typified by the first guy. There's I don't know, just clicks for me. But anyway, let's move on. So what their graphic here is saying is that from midnight to the midnight cry, there's a consolidation of power, and there's going to be other lines of prophecy that build on this, so it's a worthy characteristic to note from my understanding. And here, the king of the South, Russia, is gone. But this is right where the United Nations is coming into play. And in here, in this history here, they're talking about, this is where Trump throws out the Constitution. And there, of course, there's a good logic for that, right? You just get struck by Islam, and it's much more devastating than 9/11. You've just evidently concluded a war with Russia. You won, but you probably have some wounds. And it's in this history that for sure we're going to go into civil war and dictatorship. So this is where the Constitution is, it's fully overturned at the Sunday law. But this is where, I mean, if you implement martial law, the Constitution is pretty much done away with. And that's what they're saying in here. Constitution repudiated in here. And here is the division, disintegration that is represented by Constantine dividing the kingdom in two parts. And they're going to say, when Constantine divided the kingdom into east and west, he did that. He didn't say, okay, this is going to be Eastern Rome and this is going to be Western Rome. It was just that's what happened. When he moved to Constantinople, he moved too far away from the center of the kingdom, Rome, to manage it, and it was just the logic, it became Eastern and Western Rome. But what did he do actually at that point? He did divide the kingdom, but how did he do it actually? He divided it into three parts, his three sons. Okay, so that it was divided in 330 just by the circumstances of him moving away from his power base and making a capital that didn't have the ability to rule the kingdom. But he divided the kingdom into three parts. So what's that saying here? This would be the Sunday law. Threefold union. Beast, dragon, and false prophet. Okay, so it is all plugging in here if we're saying that this is the Sunday law. Okay, and then they have also the parallel kingdoms in here in the graph. Seventh kingdom fully set up. Constantine divided it into three parts. beast, dragon, false prophet. Russia and its allies completely defeated. Next page. And it's Sister Antonesia. Why don't you read down through, on the top of page 8, read down through the type. The statement, the verse, and then the type.
Another type is 1989, where after the collapse of the USSR, Gorbachev gave his support to the United Nations. Daniel 11:27 says, "And both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table. But it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed." Type. Anthony and Caesar were formerly in alliance, yet under the garb of friendship, they were both aspiring and intriguing for universal dominion. Their protestation of deference to and friendship for each other were the utterances of hypocrites. They spoke lies at one table. Octavia, the wife of Anthony and sister of Caesar, declared to the people of Rome at the time Anthony divorced wife that she had consented to marry him solely with the hope that it would prove a pledge of union between Caesar and Anthony. But that counsel did not prosper. The rupture came, and in the conflict that ensued, Caesar came off entirely victorious. The king of the north and the king of the south publicly portrayed themselves as friendly to and supportive of one another. But behind the scenes, both parties were intriguing for universal dominion. The pact or treaty of mutual support was ratified by Anthony's marriage to Octavia, but this pact failed along with Anthony's marriage to Octavia.
The antitype?
Before acting on Midnight Cry, Trump and Putin will
Hypocritically
feign amity between themselves and the countries they represent, as they are doing now. Behind the scenes, both parties are intriguing for the supremacy. While suffering a defeat at midnight, Trump and the United States will be victorious in the end. The marriage between Octavia and Mark Antony in the first fulfillment identifies treaties or pacts between Russia and United States. The time appointed is the Sunday law.
So what they're saying is that in this history here, that Russia and China are evidently making some kind of peace treaty following this defeat at Raphia. It's hard to understand what kind of war this is going to be, that immediately thereafter they would go into a peace treaty, but I get it.
Russia and China?
What did I say?
Russia and China.
Okay, sorry. All right. Russia and the United States. But what they're saying is that because when you get to verse 24 of Daniel 11, it says, and they're going to forecast their devices even for a time. It's talking about this 360-year period. Then the next verse begins to go back into repeat and enlarge. This 360-year period's in here, so it's saying back in this history, between midnight and the midnight cry, after Russia prevails over the United States, that they form some kind of treaty, an alliance that's just a pretense, because they're both getting ready for this one, okay? And that just seems so simple to believe, okay, that would go on. But it contributes also to the idea that this is the time period of consolidation, okay? They're building their army in advance of this, which contributes to the idea that if you're building your warships, then your economy's going. It's still going in here. And it's going to, and what happened when Islam struck on 9/11, what was probably the primary consequence? Economic. So here, they've been building the economy again, and here it's going to be doubly as hard. The economy gets whacked at the midnight cry. Sister Tamina?
I was wondering if we have another line which demonstrates a time between midnight cry and Sunday law.
Another line that
A second
demonstrates,
witness.
pardon me?
A second witness to a time being marked between midnight cry and Sunday law.
You mean as the 360?
Yeah.
Okay, what's a time? A year, so you could find a year, you could find a day. That if you found a day between here and here, or a year between here and here, you'd have a second witness. Anyone know one? Another witness for the expression time or 360 years that we already know about between the midnight cry and the Sunday law. Everyone's thinking cap is on?
What was the question?
That Tamina is saying that if we're going to apply the 360 years from 31 AD to 330 between midnight cry and the Sunday law, that in verse 24 it's expressed as a time, but we know it was 360 years. So do we have another symbol in this history that gives a second witness to time or even 360? It could be 12 months too. Do you have a 12 in there? Okay, we'll keep our eyes open. Okay. You discover something initially, and you don't initially have that second witness, but it doesn't mean that it isn't there. There's something to take note of. They're saying here that this marriage between Antony and Octavius's sister, was it? Caesar's sister, Octavius Caesar, represents a treaty that will be formed here to try to make peace between the two. But in the history that we're dealing with both Antony and Julius Caesar, you have this unholy relationship between the king of the north and Cleopatra. And there has to be some kind of lesson in there too, because it's in two stories. And I'm going to put this up there. This isn't in the paper, but it's worth considering. Julius Caesar, he goes, this isn't the way to do it. Julius Caesar, he goes to Egypt. And this marks prophetically that he's going to die. He falls in love, or at least has Cleopatra, relationships with Cleopatra. He forms a triumvirate. Don't know how to spell it, so I'll abbreviate it, but ultimately becomes a dictator. And his death is marked. Not all these rulers in Daniel's ruler's death are marked, but his is. And there might even be another one I'm not thinking about. But this is the same characteristics you can find in Mark Antony. Okay, so you got a line upon line here where Antony becomes part of a triumvirate that turns into a dictatorship with Octavius. Julius Caesar forms a triumvirate. He becomes the dictator. But the Bible says if you go to Egypt, you're going to die. They both went to Egypt, and then their death is both associated with their trip to Egypt. They both have a relationship with this woman in Egypt, a church in Egypt, an atheistic church, perhaps, something like that. And their death is both marked. So I think we got double witnesses about Cleopatra that need to be figured out.
I think another characteristic is the fact that he was slain by his so-called friends. I could see that being a part of that.
Yeah, slain by so-called friends, both of them.
Yeah.
Both of them. So do you know why what I'm saying by that in terms of a class? Is that there has to be some kind of light as we put this history together that includes the history of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. When we plug them into this history, there has to be some lesson that's being taught about both these guys getting seduced by Cleopatra, if that's the way to say it. What does that represent? That the northern king forms an unlawful relationship with a woman, a church in Egypt, an atheistic king of the south church. All right, verse 28. No, we can go back to Brother Vadim. Read verse 28 there on the paper and the type to the bottom.
Daniel 11:28. Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. Type. Two returnings from the following conquest are here brought to view. The first after the events narrated in verses 26 and 27, and the second after this power had had indignation against the holy covenant and had performed exploit. The first was fulfilled in the return of Caesar after his expedition against Egypt and Athens. He returned to Rome with abundant honor and riches, for, says Prideaux, at this time such vast riches were brought to Rome from Egypt on the reducing of that country and the return of Octavianus, which is Caesar, and his army from thence.
Wait a second, please. So that would be right here. Okay, he just defeated Mark Antony at the Battle of Actium, and he's talking about him returning to Rome. There's two returnings. He's returning to Rome and celebrating this victory. So that's here. Okay, and they're going to say that in their anti-type. But just so you're seeing that that's the one returning. There's two returnings that are marked.
At such time, such vast riches were brought to Rome from Egypt on the reducing of that country and the return of Octavianus, which is Caesar, and his army from thence, that the value of money fell 1/2, and the prices of provisions and all vendible wares was doubled thereon. Caesar,
What does that mean?
Hyperinflation.
Hyperinflation? But I mean, explain why is he saying that happens?
From the defeat of, because he brought so much riches back from his conquest.
There was so much goods.
That he just inflated the economy, and that everything sort of loses value because there's so much wealth in the system.
So if this is a characteristic, what happens after Battle of Actium, or in that time period? Economy is going to be totally destabilized, and Islam is going to hit at that time period too. Okay, if we're going to plug that in as the returning. So what I'm saying is it makes sense. We already know that the economy is going to crash big time at that period of time because the people of the United States are going to plead for a Sunday law in order to return to temporal prosperity. So if this is teaching us that there's an economic boom from the beginning of the 45th president up to the midnight cry, now it's taking this one returning and marking a destabilization of the economy right there at that point, which is consistent with what we understand leads to the Sunday law. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Caesar was celebrating his victories in a 3-day triumph, a triumph which Cleopatra herself would have graced as one of the royal captives had she not artfully caused herself to be beaten by the fatal ass.
I would, speaking to you about what your question's about, if this is correct, I think it is. This is also saying that the Church of Communism, the Church of Egypt, dies right there. The King of the South ends right there. Now there's going to be a new King of the South. But go ahead.
The next great enterprise of the Romans after the overthrow of Egypt was the expedition against Judea. and the capture and destruction of Jerusalem. The Holy Covenant is doubtless the covenant which God has maintained with his people under different forms in different ages of the world, that is, with all believers in him. The Jews rejected Christ, and according to the prophecy that all who would not hear that prophet should be cut off, they were destroyed out of their own land and scattered to every nation under heaven. And while Jews and Christians alike suffered under the oppressive hands of the Romans, it was doubtless in the reduction of Judea especially that the exploits mentioned in the text were exhibited.
Okay, so they're talking about two returnings in the verse. The first returning here is after the victory over Mark Antony and Cleopatra, but this returning is AD 70, the destruction of Jerusalem, right? Which lines up with what? Yeah, I'm not getting to those details, but it lines up with the Sunday law. Where they're putting it is right where it would be. Tyler? Go ahead, Connor. Sorry.
Close of probation.
No, antitype. Yeah, you can read close of probation and then the antitype.
Close of probation on the Jewish nation and the subsequent destruction of Jerusalem. Antitype. After Actium, which marks the defeat of Russia at the Midnight Cry, the king of the North, USA, will turn his attention to his own land.
Paneum.
Yeah, Paneum.
No, it's Actium, not Actium.
Which
It's
Yeah, Actium is Actium. On this paper, the only thing you have to reverse is Raphia and Paneum, but Actium is a new battle. So he's referencing Actium, which is Paneum,
after.
not Raphia.
His heart shall be against the Holy Covenant. This marks the passing of a national Sunday law. This is also seen in Daniel 11:30. For the ships of Kittim shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the Holy Covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant.
Go ahead, one more.
Uriah Smith identifies the indignation and intelligence against the Holy Covenant as a decree of Justinian, which declared the Pope the corrector of heretics. This is seen at the Sunday law, where a decree is passed which gives the same authority to the union of apostate Protestant churches in the United States. The exploits identified in the first fulfillment constitute the destruction of Jerusalem, which takes place at the Sunday law. This verse also identifies the end of the time of Rome's supremacy. In the first fulfillment, the end of this time was marked by Constantine and his dividing of the Roman Empire. This can also
Typify.
the Sunday law, where national ruin, division, and disintegration follow that nation's apostasy.
So, did you see the other history they put in there? When was Justinian's decree? Because they're saying this is right here. 533. Now, typically I would have put 538 there, because this is where but you could put 538 over here too at the Universal Sunday Law. But 533, did you get the argument that they made about 533? That this is where the Pope is made the corrector of heretics and the head of the churches, and therefore there's a statement where Sister White says, not until the Protestant churches have power to control the state, to enforce their own decrees and dogma, has the image of the beast been formed. The complete formation of the image of the beast is at the Sunday law, and it's marking when the Protestant churches have taken the ascendancy over the government. Okay? And the government in 533 would be Eastern Rome, Justinian, that has just said to the Roman Church, you are the corrector of heretics, therefore you have the ascendancy over me. And they're using this to say this is the climax of the image of the beast.
A
a really neat thing about Justinian is, from my understanding, he was described as, and I might be wrong, but he was described as the last emperor of Rome because, not because he was actually the last emperor of Rome, but because he tried to regain the glory of the Western Roman Empire, and he was in a large part successful, but not entirely. He tried to regain the Western Empire and all of its glory and all of the greatness of it, which is really interesting because you have someone like Trump whose whole mantra is "Make America Great Again," when Justinian's exact thing was "I'm going to make Rome great again." You know, it was the exact same parallel, which is interesting. Since you're bringing Justinian in.
They did. How come everyone's so quiet and unanimated this morning? What do you know that I don't know? Okay. Yes. Oh, okay.
You said we're so quiet, so I say something. I looked up the names of Octavius, Mark Antony, and Cleopatra, and Octavius means the eighth.
The eighth?
Yeah. And then Cleopatra
Yeah,
means the
octagon.
glory of fathers.
The what?
Glory of the fathers. And then Mark means warlike or god of war. And Anthony, they didn't really know. Some said flower, others said priceless.
But you're,
I'm just
who's the
saying
woman?
mix. Cleopatra.
That means glory of the fathers?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
And Octavius is what?
The eighth.
Eighth. What would it mean that Octavius was the eighth?
No, not.
No, I know you have something else.
Cleopatra, will that in this history, was she also the queen of Egypt?
Yeah, if they called her a queen, was she called a queen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And will not this became in Cleopatra herself the church and state, because she's a woman but also she's the queen, church and state combined in Cleopatra herself?
I guess, but she, at least at certain points in time, because initially she was there with her brother, they were both contending for future rule, and then when she gets hooked up with...
Her and her brother were supposed to marry. That's what they wanted at first when they were younger, so that's an improper relationship. But then when Mark Antony fell in love with her, he was submissive onto her because he bought her the fat, gave her half of everything he had, and he was submissive onto her. That's why he actually went against Octavia, because they was coming down there for her. So that's an improper relationship. But I just wanted to make one other statement. In Daniel 11:40, we see all three entities of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. And verse 40 says, the king of the north is going to come back with chariots and horsemen. And on one level, that's just military. And the shift now is economic. So it's a new form of two-horn power. And when you say one horn goes down again at the midnight cry, the economics, I was looking and saying, well, the military for the United States may be almost depleted at the Sunday law. If you understand the logic.
Yeah, but they're still the biggest kid in town all the way to the end.
I believe they'll grapple with the United Nations just to make the military strong again, because they're going to take two massive hits from Islam. Midnight Cry strike is going to be big, and the Sunday law is going to even top that. So they will need extra help. So I would see the United Nations coming in with military at the Sunday law to support, because the economics go down to the Midnight Cry. I say the military goes down to the Sunday law, and they need the world behind them.
Tamina, Tyler.
Octavius defeats Anthony at the Midnight Cry, right? Did I get that right?
Yes.
Then that would fit, because his name is the eighth, and we mark the number 8 at the Midnight Cry from the lifting up from the first fruits.
Praise cleansing the temple. Pope of Rome is in charge by then, pretty much.
Pulling the strings.
Yeah.
My question's for Tan. Tan, you mentioned in what you were just saying that he gave Cleopatra half of his wealth.
Yeah.
Do you have a reference for that?
I had a bunch of.
If you
stuff
show
on
me
history.
just later that
Yeah,
you
yeah.
do that.
I'll
Okay.
show you later.
The reason that's really neat is because you have right at this same time, and depends exactly where you're marking it, but right at the same time you have Esther and John the Baptist who have both, or
Yeah.
sorry, in those stories at least, you have Esther and Salome, two women who kings promised them up to half of their kingdom right at the same point. Esther obviously is a good woman, but Salome is doing the dance of deception, and Herod's offering half of his kingdom.
Yeah, well, yes, but they're both going to die at Actium. So he's given her kingdom a little bit before, half of his kingdom a little bit before. But
They promise it before though, because in the
yeah,
they're
okay,
being
they promise
deceived
it.
and then they die.
Yeah, okay. That's pretty cool. Well, we didn't get through it, but we're almost through it. Remember when you go through this, and even those of you that have downloaded this off the web, everywhere you see Paneum, put Raphia, and everywhere you see Raphia, put Paneum. It'll save you some heartburn. Brother Tan, you want to have a closing prayer?
Loving Father who art in heaven, we thank you, O Lord, for the words that you've opened up unto us, Father. And as we submit ourselves unto you, and we give our lives unto thee, O God, the requirement comes that we have to study your word to be approved of by you. So, Father, as these things are conveyed to us, help us to make these things clear by having a personal understanding. Therefore, we can give an input because we know the Holy Spirit works with many minds. As we go throughout this day, I ask you to be with us and to let these things, oh Father, trouble our minds, that it will compel us to go and see these things true for ourselves. We thank you and we love you. And we ask all these blessings in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.